So, Martha, are you enjoying being back in Washington, D.C.?
I am back in my old stomping ground. I love it.
Political town, isn't it?
It is, yeah. If I was in danger of forgetting I was in Washington, D.C., I was queuing up this morning to go into a Senate hearing. And the people behind me, who were younger than I was, were having a discussion about who the most paranoid president is. And let me tell you, they're not having these discussions in Santa Monica.
No, everybody's a politician in this town, aren't they? I'm James Matthews.
And I'm Martha Kelner.
You're listening to day 66 of Trump 100. What are we calling it today, Martha? Signal Gate? Emoji Gate?
It's definitely something gate, isn't it? Hugely scandalous. Not Watergate, to be fair, but it's in the neighbourhood, right?
Yeah, well, they haven't shut the gate on the stone-cold scandal of the Signal group chat. We'll be looking at the fallout.
And Ukraine and Russia agreed to a Black Sea ceasefire deal. A step on the road to peace, certainly, but how far?
It's the story of the group chat on the Signal app, and it's a huge scandal. To recap, America's most senior officials were texting each other about a military strike on Houthi rebels, and they included a journalist in the chat.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, has now found himself at the centre of this fiasco. He was included on a group chat discussing sensitive information about an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. Initially, yesterday, you'll remember, we had Donald Trump denying all knowledge of this Signal group.
Then we heard from Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. He was one of those on this group chat. His response was to trash the journalist involved.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again.
And Hegseth was saying that despite the fact that the White House had already confirmed the veracity, the authenticity of this reporting, the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg stood by his journalism. This was him on MSNBC.
It was simply too improbable to me that they would have such poor operational security as to inadvertently invite the editor of The Atlantic into a national security discussion about the timing of a bombing campaign.
Yeah, that trashing of Jeffrey Goldberg, it wasn't confined to the defense secretary. Trump's media team were all over it, weighing in on it and on him. It's important to state that Goldberg, he withheld details from his reporting, details that might have jeopardized safety. And indeed, The Atlantic, they've issued a statement. It reads, attempts to disparage and discredit The Atlantic, our editor and our reporting, follow an obvious playbook by elected officials and others in power who are hostile to journalists and the First Amendment rights of all Americans. Our journalists, they say, are continuing to fearlessly and independently report the truth in the public interest.
This is almost the most outrageous thing about it all, isn't it? Because first of all, you have the White House standing up that this journalist was accidentally invited to this Signal group. And then you have this outrageous attempt to deflect attention by disparaging the journalist. You had Mike Waltz, who is the national security advisor, who was the very man who invited Jeff Goldberg onto this group, saying journalists are just looking to make names for themselves. You have Donald Trump calling him a sleazebag.
Yeah.
And this is a man who actually took steps to try and protect national intelligence. You know, he left this group as soon as those strikes on the Houthi rebels in Yemen had happened. He took himself out of it when other journalists, perhaps those slightly less honourable, might have, stayed around and seen what other stories they could get hold of.
Yeah. What would you have done, Martha?
I think I would have left, but only because I reckon what happened is he probably took legal advice that he'd seen enough to stand up the details of this story, which of course is the scandalous security breach, and then he removed himself so as not to be in a position where he was privy to details that he shouldn't have been.
Yeah, journalistic principles, always a fine line, eh?
Exactly.
The National Security Council at the White House, they've said, yep, this is all authentic. And so that's where we are. If they want to try and twist it, politicize it, they're going to have a struggle on their hands.
And Jeffrey Goldberg and The Atlantic magazine are saying there's more reporting to come on this further down the road. So this is not a scandal that's going away easily, much as the Trump administration might like it
No,
to.
indeed. And that's the next step. If they are quibbling with the content, then Jeffrey Goldberg, he's got the content. Will he publish it? He's in a position to let us know more.
Today, though, attention turned to the Senate There was this committee hearing which was pre-programmed to look at worldwide threats. In the end, the focus was very much on the danger from within the US, from incompetence or at the very least recklessness by Trump advisors and cabinet members. Two of the Signal 18, that's what we're calling them now.
All right.
So, you know, the
Seems reasonable.
The 18 people who were included on this group chat, Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of the CIA, they were up for questioning. They must have found themselves screaming at their work calendars, wondering how they'd managed to find themselves at this Senate hearing the day after this disaster.
The irony.
Tulsi Gabbard had to face the Democratic committee member, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
I think it's fair to say that both Gabbard and Ratcliffe were reluctant witnesses at that Senate hearing. The gist of their testimony was that none of the information was classified. Clearly, others will beg to differ, given that we've read that the group chat contained timings, weapons used, sequencing of attacks.
And of course, you were in the Capitol building, in the corridors, I take it, all very busy and lots of excitement, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. Democrat politicians filing out at that Senate committee hearing. And as you might imagine, they were very vocal, perhaps seeking to gain currency from this crisis to make up ground on their Republican rivals. I grabbed a word with one of the senior Democrats, Elizabeth Warren, Senator for Massachusetts. I actually spoke to her as she was running into a lift inside the Senate building. Yeah, I was holding the door open.
Talk about foot in the door.
Yeah, literally. Don't say I don't put life and limb on the line for this podcast. Can allies trust the US with intelligence now?
Look, this breach shows the risks that the Trump administration is running, both for the United States and for our allies around the world. That's why there must be accountability, and that means Heth should be fired and there should be a full-scale criminal investigation.
Elizabeth Warren there calling for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to be fired. That was a call echoed by several other leading Democrat politicians. I think a lot of the focus has fallen on Hegseth, not only because he is one of the most senior members of this Signal group chat, but also because many people believe he shouldn't have been in that position in the first place, that he is utterly inexperienced for this job. He is, remember, a long-time Fox News host, has never held a job in government before. He's faced sexual assault allegations. There are reports that he has in the past run organisations into heavy debt as well. So these Democrats are saying he's now proved what we've said all along, that he is not fit for this role.
Yeah, Democrats, they've been quick to make another point with regard to Hillary Clinton. Remember her use of a private email server for official communications. That was in 2016, very much the thrust of the Republicans' campaign for Donald Trump. They were screaming scandal at that time. And of course, Hillary Clinton herself has tweeted about it. In fact, she tweeted, "Are you kidding me?" That was her view. But Donald Trump, we heard from him today, 24 hours after the Signal story broke. He took questions. There was no question, I might say, Martha, that he was standing by Mike Waltz. He absolutely seems to be this national security advisor. He was the one who appeared to add the journalist to the group chat.
If it was up to me, everybody would be sitting in a room together. The room would have solid lead walls and a lead ceiling and a lead floor. But, you know, life doesn't always let you do that.
It is quite the scandal, isn't it? Here in the nation's capital, it was a day when everybody freshened their perspective, I think, on national security breaches, just how bad this is. I caught up with Ned Price. He's a former spokesman for the State Department, previously a deputy ambassador at the UN. He worked in the Obama and Biden administrations, a man who has seen government from the inside. Tell me your thoughts about this episode that we're witnessing.
Well, it's really stunning, and it doesn't have a neat precedent or analogy in history, because this is the first time I can recall in which a group of the senior-most officials of our national security bureaucracy has displayed such stunning incompetence in terms of how they have comported themselves and how they have protected or not some of the most sensitive information in the possession of the U.S. government. These are the types of conversations that almost by definition take place inside the White House Situation Room, probably one of the most secure facilities within the United States government. The fact that they thought it appropriate to do so on a commercial platform that is susceptible to intelligence services as well as private sector entities is just absolutely stunning. It is reckless, it is careless, but more so than that, it is dangerous for our own national security.
Yeah, how is information like this normally shared?
Yeah. Normally, these conversations, the conversations and convenings of the Principals Committee takes place in the Situation Room. It's a facility that is protected from eavesdropping. It is located on the White House premises. Who comes in, who comes out is closely guarded. Of course, there are going to be times where the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense are going to need to be traveling around the world, and that's more than understandable, in which case they have teams that travel with them that set up what's called CIVETS technologies, secure video teleconference capabilities that allow them to be beamed into the Situation Room on this top secret basis. Signal is no substitute for that.
How do you view the potential for, for the Russians, for the Chinese, for an adversary getting access to the content of that signal chat or signal per se?
Well, there's no higher value set of targets for the world's intelligence services than the people who are in this group chat. The Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the DNI, the CIA Director, and the list goes on. All of their resources are going to be trained on this group of people. And if and when, I think we can fairly confidently say, they were to come upon a single signal chat room that has all of them, it's really a gold mine. It's a gold mine in two respects. One, in terms of the specific operation they were discussing against the Houthis. But two, it seems from Goldberg's reporting and the information that he didn't reproduce in full, that they were discussing very sensitive sources and methods that would be more broadly applicable in terms of U.S. military installations in the region, what the U.S. government knows, what it doesn't know. All of that is going to be of extraordinary value to the intelligence services you might expect.
And this, the response seems to be classified information. What classified information? How do you view the kind of stuff that we were dealing with here?
There is no question in my mind that when this information was conveyed, it was classified. And I say that because TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures dealing with military operations are by definition classified information. And so I think the administration, quite frankly, is lying when they say this was not classified information. Now, there is a very narrow technicality, the most technical of technicalities within our system, whereby people at the very top of the bureaucratic food chain can retroactively declassify information. And what they may be preparing to argue is that this information is not classified because we waved our magic wand and said so. But that is not, of course, true to the spirit of the practices these individuals themselves should be practicing to keep our national security safe. To do that, it is reckless, it's careless, it's just absolutely dangerous.
Yeah, and finally, Ned, President Trump, we saw and heard him deny knowledge of it several hours after the journalists involved had gone to the White House and asked for comment. I just wonder what your take on that is, Trump's knowledge of it or not.
Well, I would be surprised if he didn't know about it when he was asked about it in the first instance yesterday. As you said, the White House had been notified hours ago. This is not the type of story that anyone would be caught by surprise. I have a great deal of confidence that the national security advisors or others had apprised the president of this. Of course, in every administration in which I have worked in and around the White House, namely the Obama administration and the Biden administration, a story like this never would have happened. But if there were anything even approaching this scale, the president would absolutely be apprised and he'd be familiar with the details, and I suspect Trump was as well.
The White House will clearly deeply regret that a journalist was accidentally added to this Signal group chat, but this could have been so much worse. What if it had not have been a journalist? What if instead it had been a Russian official or a Chinese official or someone who could thwart those attacks on the Houthis? And remember, lives were quite literally at stake here. This wasn't a drone attack on these targets in Yemen. These were manned missions. And I think that's why a lot of people from within the Department of Defense are so angry that the people in charge weren't following rules, basic rules that they are expected to abide by.
Yeah, and of course, who's to say that the Russians and the Chinese and anybody else for that matter wasn't actually in the group chat without the Americans knowing they were in the group chat, hacking the phones. I mean, it's the Signal app,
Exactly.
for goodness sake. On other matters, Martha, and no less important, there appears to be progress, maybe, in talks between Ukraine and Russia. The White House has announced both sides have agreed to stop attacks in the Black Sea. The Russians, they've added the qualification, however, that it depends on restrictions being lifted on its banks and agricultural products.
Ukraine has noted that Russian qualification, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And certainly the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, isn't amused. He says any US agreement on it would be a weakening of sanctions. So there'll be further talks on progress towards a full ceasefire. No indication of when yet.
Sure.
But all this talk of Russia takes us back to the Signal group chat story, because Steve Witkoff, who is Donald Trump's envoy, Trump considers him a major peace broker. He met with Putin on March 13th. Remember that date, because just hours later he was added to the group chat.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that Russia has long attempted to compromise that very app, the Signal app.
Yeah. It's not clear whether or not Steve Witkoff had his personal phone with him or, which phone he had the Signal app on. But I do wonder, I mean, you look at this group chat and Steve Witkoff, his emojis are all over it, this patting on the back stuff. I'm not sure I'd trust Steve Witkoff not to have his personal phone with him in Moscow.
I just think that beggars belief. I've been to Russia. I, in a past life, was
Right.
an athletics correspondent for the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
And I went to Russia for the World Championships in 2013. So this is some time ago, before perhaps we knew about the complexities of hacking. And the bosses at the Daily Mail warned me not to take any personal devices with me. I left my laptop at home. I left my personal phone at home. I left my work phone at home, and I took a type of burner device.
Wow.
And I was an athletics correspondent. We're talking about the senior people
Yeah.
in the White House having conversations on Signal, very possibly, even probably, while they're inside the Kremlin.
Yeah. Fascinating. Who was the most famous athlete that you interviewed in Moscow?
Usain Bolt.
Oh, wow. What was
Got
he
back
like?
to you. Charming. He is exactly as you would expect him to be, very laid back. Although I have heard that he runs a tight ship behind the scenes, so I think a lot of the sort of laid back Jamaican patois is
All right.
for the cameras.
He runs a tight ship. I bet he runs it very fast. Anyway, that's it for day 66 of Trump 100. If you have any questions about what's going on in the White House, please do get in touch at trump100@sky.uk.
And if you'd like to share your thoughts on our podcast, we have a short survey. We're asking for your input to help us improve all our podcasts at Sky News. You can find that link in the episode description.
Thanks very much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow for day 67.
See you then.
Bye-bye.